Sports Insider podcast brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. My name is Perryn Keys. I'm the executive sports editor. I'm joined today by Wilson Alexander, our lead LSU football beat reporter, and by Scott Rabalais, our venerable longtime columnist. These two gentlemen, along with the rest of us, will brave the weather forecast on Saturday as LSU gets set to play Florida at 6:30 p.m. Saturday in Tiger Stadium. Forecast for Saturday night, according to the National Weather Service, calls for a 60% chance of showers. So not necessarily.
The chance of rain is never.
Well, that's what they say. That's we're going to put that to the test.
That's what they say. I'm still damp from the 1980 LSU Tulane game.
It's only we got 1 minute into this thing before Rab pulls out some game from 47 years ago. Anyway, gentlemen, welcome in.
How y'all doing today?
Doing fantastic. Okay, so a bit of business here first. Today's episode is brought to you by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL Financial member FINRA, SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. But to learn more, go to championwealthstrategies.com. That's championwealthstrategies.com. Contact Champion Wealth Strategies and plan like a champion today. A couple other, thank you.
He practiced.
Okay, folks. It's the majesty of a live read. A couple of other housekeeping matters here. Now, as I stumble.
Didn't practice that.
We're off to a great start. If you're tuning in, you know The Advocate has always been the number one destination for LSU football coverage, and this podcast is just another way for us to bring our great coverage to you. Please subscribe to The Advocate if you would. If you haven't already, do so with our print edition, with our digital edition. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. There is plenty. Obviously, we're off and running with LSU women's basketball and men's basketball, so there are plenty of headlines in addition to football. And so to stay up to speed with everything, you can get our LSU newsletter, and it's delivered straight to your inbox. Rab handles that 3 times a day, but it's a daily newsletter. To sign up for that, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We're here every Monday and Thursday. You can catch us live on all our social channels and our YouTube channels, specifically LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube. And if you don't catch us live, you can always catch us later on those same YouTube channels. And you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. Okay, so LSU in Florida, 6:30 p.m. Saturday in Tiger Stadium. LSU obviously coming off a disappointing loss to Alabama. And, I think that's honestly, this is sort of leaving us with left me with a couple of major questions as we move forward and go down the road for these last 3 games, the final 3 games of the regular season. Number one, and I'll put this to you, Rab, since you're the club historian, drawing upon your wealth of knowledge and memory for sort of the atmosphere in Tiger Stadium. What do you anticipate this will be? Obviously, it's much of the LSU fan base is going to sort of view this as a disappointing season for right, wrong, better, worse, up, down, whatever, and maybe thinking as Brian Kelly and his staff will have to worry about, thinking about how do we keep our interests and how do we keep the players' interests and everything like that. So 2 things, really. Number one, what do you think the atmosphere is going to be like in Tiger Stadium on Saturday? It's supposed to be a sellout. But also, how does Brian Kelly sort of keep these guys engaged now for the final 3 games with so many of the goals sort of off the board?
Yeah, I mean, this could be a tinge of disappointment. I guess a lot of it depends on the weather. If it's rainy, I was anticipating that we're going to still have a very good crowd for this game. So hopefully the weather will hold off. As Wilson said, it never rains in Tiger Stadium, or it's not supposed to anyway. But I think the people that show up will be loud and vociferous. Hey, it's Florida, and Florida's not having a vintage Florida season either. Obviously, they're still trying to get their program going under Billy Napier, and so it's not like they're coming in here with Tim Tebow or Steve Spurrier or something like that. But as for the team goes, I think, and in talking to the players yesterday, and Wilson can agree with me or not on this, I'd get the impression talking to the players that that they're buying into what Brian Kelly is selling, what he said on Monday at his weekly press conference, which is that there's still something to play for. The chance to still win 10 games for the second straight year is something to play for, and that shows stability. That shows forward momentum in the program. That they're, as he said, they're good. They're not great and they're not elite, but they're on balance they're having a good season. Yeah, it's a good season. They're in the top 20 and they're 6-3 in the country. It's good. It's not what everyone wants, but it's good. So it's a chance to finish that strong as maybe they didn't quite do last year, where they had the losses to Texas A&M and Georgia. So it's important, and this is a very important one and a very losable game for LSU if they don't come with intensity, if they don't come with focus.
This is, like you said, it's not the goal of getting to the championship game in the SEC or even in the the college football playoff, anything like that. That's all off the table at this point. But it is, like you said, for this program, important to get to 10 wins in my mind, because think back to if someone had told you, we had this discussion earlier in the week, and kind of building off of that. Think back to if someone had told you, if you're an LSU fan, January 2022, or even when Brian Kelly got hired, hey, sitting at 11 and 12 over these combined two seasons in 2021, 2022. Oh, okay, well, over the next 2 years, you're going to have a chance at 2 back-to-back 10-win seasons and an SEC championship game appearance. Like, I think that people would probably have taken that, but it's obviously the context of this year is a little bit different and colors that as a disappointment. So, it is important still to get to 10 wins, to be able to have that to hang your hat on. And it's important, I think, for Brian Kelly to be able to show that he can keep everybody together, even when things aren't going quite how you want them to still be able to finish the season strong. That message of, good wasn't good enough in order, you do want to be great, you want to be elite, that he was saying publicly. LSU released footage of the post-game locker room against Alabama. That's the same thing he was telling the players, except with a little bit more fire and passion to it, right there in the post-game locker room. And so that is something that they've heard quite a bit. And it is sort of a challenge to them. What do you really want to be? And now they're going to have to try to finish strong to show that they can take those steps in the right direction, potentially finish with 2 back-to-back 10-win seasons, and keep some forward momentum going, even though this season didn't go the way that you wanted it to.
All right. Well, so let's we talk about a 10-win season, and that's a noble and admirable goal. We're going to get to game predictions, obviously, for LSU and Florida here toward the end of the podcast, but. Since you guys bring it up, and that's as you say, it's an admirable goal, a goal worth shooting for. Saturday against Florida, the following week against Georgia State, and of course finishing up the regular season against Texas A&M. All 3 games at home. They would obviously have to win all 3 and then get to a bowl and win that bowl to get to 10 wins. Rab, we're a good way off, but do they do it?
I think. There's a big caveat that Jayden Daniels definitely plays in this game. I think, yes, I think they do. The bowl games the non-college football playoff bowl games have gotten to be such a coin flip because you don't know, which players are gonna opt out and which are not. I fully expect LSU will have some players who opt out. But we saw how many for Purdue did. They were really shorthanded in the game last year, like LSU was in the Texas Bowl 2 years ago. So
right.
That's much more of an unknown. But I think they certainly have the ability to. I will go on a limb and say yes, that they will get a 10-3.
Wilson.
It's hard, like you said, the bowl game part of it is just such unknown because you don't know about the opt-outs, you don't know who they're going to be playing. And I was just thinking back to it for a second. This team hasn't won 4 straight games at any point in the season.
No, it's lost 3 wins, lost 3 wins. Lost.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna say no for that reason because to be consistent all the way through like that is something that they have not quite done. And because of say you have some opt-outs on offense and maybe you aren't as explosive in a bowl game as you have been. And that's not like saying that like that's going to happen. Just like the possibility is there. I'll say they finished 9-4.
Fair. Interesting though, at least for the reason of Florida, Georgia State, Texas A&M, they will be favored in all 3 of those games for sure. All that having been said, they were most certainly favored to beat Texas A&M last year and went over to College Station and very much laid an egg, which I don't think any of us saw coming.
No, and that's kind of like what I mean also about like Kelly needs to be able to finish this thing strong and show that for himself and show for this program to build that offseason momentum that you don't have another sort of major letdown like that. Losing to Alabama, a top 10 team on the road, that's one thing. Losing to Ole Miss, another top 10 team on the road this season, another thing. But to have 3 straight home games against teams that you're favored against, like you need to go win those football games and to be able to show that you can keep everything together.
A&M was probably actually a really good example of, okay, for example, last year they lost to Tennessee. Tennessee had the best offense in the nation last year. Well, maybe it's not what you want, I guess, if you're an LSU fan, but there's no great shame in losing to a team like that. There was no great shame in losing to Florida State. That was a tough loss last year, but nonetheless, A&M really brought into focus. Okay, you guys aren't good enough to just go to sort of roll the ball out there and win. Speaking of going between the sidelines and being able to play, we got an update about Jayden Daniels on Wednesday morning. Wilson, can you just sort of reset that for us?
Absolutely. So Jayden, of course, is in concussion protocol. And he's making progress is sort of the very general way of putting it. And it's still day to day, but he had a workout Wednesday morning, and Brian Kelly said that went well. He will be participating in practice this afternoon in a non-contact fashion. And if that goes well, which is kind of like the last thing to get through, then he'll be cleared for contact on Thursday. And then in which case all indications point to him being available to play on Saturday. So he's making the right kind of steps that he has to do at this point to get through that concussion protocol and be available.
Rab, how many points is Jayden Daniels worth?
Just thinking how, less effective they could be without him and his running ability. That's a lot, but I didn't say 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's a lot.
Which, incidentally, the line now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is 14 right now.
Yeah,
LSU
I'm not saying he goes down to pick him
points.
if he doesn't play. I think LSU's still the favorite, but I think he's worth a couple of drives that don't stall, that you have to punt or settle for a field goal. So yeah, I would say a good bit, a couple of touchdowns.
We got into this obviously in Monday's podcast about, well, hey, if Jayden plays, if he doesn't play, that obviously leads to Garrett Nussmeier, the number 1 backup, and sort of the presumed heir apparent for when Jayden Daniels heads off to the NFL next year. At the moment, of course, he hasn't played a ton this year. 17 to 33, 51.5% passing, 196 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Let's just play pretend and say that Jayden Daniels doesn't feel good in warmups, or he doesn't make it all the way out of protocol, and Garrett Nussmeier has to play. What does LSU's game plan look? How does it look different? And what do you want to see out of Garrett Nussmeier? What should he be doing?
Well, he's obviously not the runner that Jayden is. So you take away a lot of that dimension. Not that he's immobile, I'm not saying that, but he can move around the pocket and get you a yard or 2 or a sneak or something like that. But you're not going to expect him to go for 30 yards, like we've seen Jayden do a lot of times this season. So that takes away that option. But maybe. I don't know that the passing game changes that much. I think he's got the skills and certainly the arm strength, and he can make that right sideline to right hash to left sideline throw, or vice versa, very easily, and has the touch and stuff like that. Maybe not quite as consistently accurate as Jayden, but he can play that game. So you have to rely more on your other running backs. I guess that's where it changes. Logan Diggs, and not just Logan Diggs, but maybe more Josh Williams, who we saw score a touchdown, rushing touchdown against Alabama. Maybe Caleb Jackson, maybe even Noah Cain, to try to get you a little more in the running game that Jayden wouldn't provide, because he's once again on total yards LSU's leading rusher.
Wilson?
Well, Rab kind of said everything that we had to touch on all of it.
That's good, because you're usually very prepared.
So the passing game would not have to change very much. And the thing that would actually be kind of interesting in the passing game is if Garrett would be taking even sort of different kinds of throws. conceptually, I don't think much would have to change. But he's going to look at the game and see it differently than Jayden does. Would he try to hit maybe an deep outbreaking route that Jayden doesn't throw very much at all, kind of thing? We've seen him go for those throws and complete them in preseason practice. He's going to try to fit things into the tighter window, and it can be very exciting. The key will, of course, also be the decision making, which has always been the thing with Garrett, which I think really, really improved at the end of last season. Mm-hmm. We haven't gotten to see it this year really at all. But and even on the Alabama game at the end there, he had a great throw to Malik Neighbors on that fourth down that just got dropped. Like maybe he can finish off a drive there and give LSU, even if it was an outside chance, maybe a chance. So. The passing game I don't think has to change much, but like you said, it's the run game that would probably alter. LSU's done some design quarterback runs with Jayden. This QB draws and things like that. We saw it particularly in the Missouri game. We saw it here against Alabama. It's been a consistent thing, and it was really key in those games. That you're not probably doing that with Garrett Nussmeier,
right?
And we asked Garrett Dellinger about this yesterday, and Kyron Lacey as well. And Garrett had, I think, the most interesting answer, which was LSU does so much zone read, inside handoff. Giving the quarterback that option to run. And Dellinger said that would still, that the game plan hasn't overly changed just because there's some uncertainty with Jayden at the moment, that they would still be doing those things and Garrett would have the option. And if it's there, he would pull it. He can run, like you said, a little bit, not the same way that Jayden does. There's nobody in the country who runs like Jayden does. So I think you would have to get more out of your traditional run game, which this could be a game to have to do that against because Florida's allowing 4.41 yards per carry.
Right.
So I think that's what it would look like.
It begs the question, too, though, if Jayden plays, are they going to call many, if any, design runs for him? Obviously, when he got hurt against Alabama, it was dropping back to pass, not running. But we have seen him obviously take many big shots this year when he's been running the ball.
Get pinballed.
Yeah, and you don't want that. There's no way of knowing, but I would think they're going to be. You used to always have the threat of him running, but I don't know if they're going to want to call on him to run the ball as much against Florida if he plays. Do you agree?
Yeah, maybe I could see that being a scenario, but also what comes to mind is if you don't trust him to do something and you feel like he's not at 100%, then he probably shouldn't be out there, especially because we're dealing with a head injury here. So it's like if there's something that you're not doing because you're worried about that, then in the first place, he probably shouldn't be playing. If he's out there, then I would expect him to be able to do everything that he's done this season and not be too cautious about it because he would have cleared all the protocols and be available to play fully.
And one way or the other, that what it does mean, at least in my opinion, is that it's incumbent on the offensive line to be just that much better, on their A game, so to speak, to make sure that, Jayden Daniels doesn't take, you never want him to take any unnecessary hits, but, keep him really, really protected as we go down the road the final 3 games this season. So we know about the offense. The offense does what it does and largely has been one of the most successful in the nation. The defense has not been one of the most successful in the nation, one of the least successful in the nation. We've been over this, many, many times now, but 125th nationally in third down defense. None of these numbers are good. 12th in the SEC, 407.4 yards allowed per game. What are these guys? We understand that the Florida offense that's coming in here this Saturday is not, vintage Spurrier-esque, Tebow-esque, anything like that. But these guys can't take anything for granted, I don't think, in terms of, feeling good about stopping much of anything, the run, the pass, anything. What would you like to see out of the defense over the final 3 games, Rab?
I don't know. I mean, you're pretty much 9 games is more than enough sample size to say you are what you are, and what they are is not good. In fact, it's really kind of the point where it's hard to imagine LSU being any worse, on defense. I guess you can always be worse.
That's a challenge.
But it's for LSU, the school that, as I've said before, prides itself, historically on its defense. That's a core foundation of the LSU program is playing great defense under Charlie Mack and with the Bandits and with players like Casanova and Peterson and Matthew and Dorsey and all these guys over the years, and that they can't do it now is just boggles the mind. What can you expect? I can expect that they're going to try to say if they hold.
What would
Florida
you like? What would I like to see?
Yeah. I would like to see them be able to get some stops and get off the field, not give up 11 of 14 third down conversions to an Alabama offense that I think scored its most points in an SEC game Saturday.
Yeah.
And so I would like to see them go, be able to say, if they held Florida like 24 points, I'd be like, wow, they did a great job. I'd probably be writing that Saturday night after the game. But I would say realistically, getting more sacks, getting another sack or two, forcing a turnover, which they didn't do against Alabama, which they've done at times. They've had a few key ones over the course of the season, but not consistently. And just disrupting the other team's offense to the point where they've got a punt. And Florida has just enough offense to make you worry. Mertz has developed better as a quarterback than probably a lot of people expected. He's got a nice pass combination with Pearsall. You got a nice runner with Etienne. They've got some pieces to work with on offense, certainly enough to vex this defense. And you got to find a way to stop them and just put them in bad situations. I guess that'd be the best thing. Put them in bad situations where they might not succeed on 3rd and 18.
Wilson, anything specific you would like to see from the LSU defense in terms of progress, personnel, anything over the next 3 weeks?
A couple things come to mind. I'd like to see just if whatever their game plan is against Florida, if it's not working, it's not necessarily even a halftime adjustment, but like if it's not working at some point, make an adjustment. Like call the spy kind of thing, like we didn't see against Alabama.
Right.
That was the thing that was so frustrating about that game, especially in reviewing it, but even very much in real time as well. Was okay if this call is available, then make it at some point. Try something a little bit different because, like I said, it's hard for this defense to get much worse than it is. And with you now having 3 losses, as much as important as it was, like we said, to get to 10 this season, if you can do it, don't be so conservative necessarily. Call a few more blitzes. Do some things that are a little bit different. The personnel is limiting, especially in the secondary. Like we saw, especially in the Alabama game plan, most of all, showed that, LSU was terrified of getting beat deep and dropping into these really soft zone coverages. And okay, I can understand, the reasoning behind that. But, maybe try some different things here and there, because what you've done to this point hasn't worked. So don't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And if your game plan is in the middle of the Florida game isn't working, then adjust. And the other thing in terms of personnel, get Whit Weeks involved a little bit more, especially as you build toward next season. I mean, this is a guy who's probably going to need to be a starter next year. He's played some good football. Did not have a single defensive snap against Alabama. It was the first time. His role has dropped significantly since Omar Speights got healthy.
Sure.
Which they like experience. They kept talking about that when it comes to Omar versus Whit. That Omar's played so much football, but Whit has shown you something to not have a single defensive snap. The first time he hadn't done that since the opener. Get him on the field a little bit and mix him in there, and continue to see maybe what you have out of Jayden Toviano at corner. That seemed to work okay against Alabama. He wasn't really tested, but those would be some of the personnel things that I would like to see in particular.
I know you got a question in your mailbag this week about players like Deshaun Womack and why, and then again, it speaks to Brian Kelly seems to like his veterans a good amount. I will say that in terms of, play some young guys, play some newbies versus instead of, continuing to run the vets out there. I do think it's a little bit of we don't know for sure, but I think it's a little bit of a tightrope you have to walk, because I think if the coaching staff just runs a bunch of freshmen out there, don't you risk the ability to be able to look your players in the eye and say, yes, we're still going all out for this season and trying to win these games and, give this thing a good faith effort instead of just saying, we need to play these young guys and get them ready for next year.
Well, not quite, because it's a performance thing. And
which is very fair. Yeah.
And LSU played freshmen last year. Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Harold Perkins, Mason Taylor started 4 freshmen. Because they were better than the older guys who were in front of them. So if your performance gives it, players will understand if they've gotten beaten out. I think honestly it would be more of a good faith thing to say, this guy has earned playing time and we're playing him.
Toviano aside, and maybe some 1 or 2 others aside, though, don't you think though that if they just as you said, there were 4 players on offense who were freshmen who started last year. That says to me that, okay, if this guy's the better guy and we think he's the better guy, we'll play him. What this says to me is that so many of these young players on the defensive side, particularly, they don't think these guys are ready yet. Now, we can debate whether we think that's fair or not or true or not, but I will say what I would have liked to have seen Jayden Daniels, based on the one game that he showed us against Alabama, seems like he was up to the task and ready for it. I grant you that they didn't try him. Alabama didn't go bombs away. They didn't try 20 long bombs and stuff like that. So maybe that's not, maybe you get an incomplete grade, so to speak, in terms of your pass coverage. But, past that, I haven't, not to put too long a tail on this kite, but, Womack, don't we agree that, okay, he's not a what's the word I'm looking for? He's not the complete player, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. Is that fair?
No, for sure. I mean, he is. We talked to Obi Gofu about him a little bit yesterday or Tuesday. About Womack, and he was just saying, like, look, he's a freshman who's been here for like 2 semesters, and he needs to continue to develop, and that's kind of a very natural thing. There's nothing wrong with that,
right?
Even it's a 5-star, so you think like, oh, maybe he can play right away, but you could tell very early on in preseason camp that physically he was not there yet. Mm-hmm. He was getting pancaked at times, and that's way back in August. He's come along since then, and it's certainly in some ways, but there's a maturation and a physical development that needs to happen there. I think both on and off the field, doing all the right things in order to, continue to become that kind of a player. And he is flashed in the Arkansas game. And although it's weird because like his snaps have been so limited since then,
right.
So it's really hard to say like, oh, he would be doing so much with them. But the snaps that he has gotten, his pass rush lanes need to be more disciplined. And he needs to, be able to add weight in order to fit the run. He's played some jack linebacker and some defensive end, so part of it's also just like settling on a spot. I think he's now at the jack. But if it's still kind of going back and forth, then that's hard to do all of that at the same time. And with Toviano, they were trying him at nickel. And at safety for a long time this season. This was the first, he'd only just switched back to corner. So with him, it's also like figure out again, like settle his position. Like where is he going to be long term? So he can kind of take that development there and really get used to the spot.
This is the LSU Sports Insider podcast brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Again, we're here every Monday and Thursday. We are here live on all our social channels, specifically our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers at NOLA.com. Please subscribe to that channel if you've not already. If you don't catch us live, you can catch us after the fact on those same YouTube channels and social channels. We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and wherever other finer podcasts are found. Subscribe to The Advocate if you haven't already. Please do so. You can do so at theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. Get a hold of our LSU newsletter, too. As I say, Rab handles that 3 times a week, and we appreciate that. Support your local journalist. To do that, you can sign up at you can sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And we are, of course, brought to you by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more, go to championwealthstrategies.com. Okay, so Florida. Specifically the Florida offense, I want to talk about them a little bit. As you guys said, they're 10th in the SEC in rushing, 4.1 yards per carry, 134.4 yards per game. They're actually not half bad. They're a little bit better than I thought they might be in terms of their pass offense. As I look for my notes here, I apologize. 8.0 yards per pass attempt. That's 40th in the nation. That's not half bad. And I will just say to go a little bit deeper on that, Graham Mertz, the transfer from Wisconsin. You two know that I, maybe following the Badgers a little bit closer than the average college football fan here. He was a 5-star quarterback who was seen as a player who was going to maybe add that one missing dimension to the Wisconsin offense. He was okay, but it did not work out as Wisconsin had anticipated a 5-star quarterback working out. He transfers to Florida, and I will give credit where credit's due. Billy Napier has gotten a lot out of him. If I'm not mistaken, 17 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And that was the big thing for Graham Mertz when he was at Wisconsin. I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way, but he was the king of the untimely, soul-crushing interception, a soul-crushing turnover. And so they did, I'm reminded, if I'm not mistaken, that win over Tennessee they had was 29-13 or 26-19 or something like that. I can't remember now. But I do remember in post-game, very specifically, Billy Napier saying over and over again, and this is something that he said when he was at UL, winner of 4 straight Western Divisions, Sun Belt Western Divisions at UL. We stayed on schedule. And what I think he meant by that was, they didn't get behind the chains, they didn't commit penalties, they did all that. They sort of did what they were trying to do and didn't commit any unforced errors, things of that nature. So this is not maybe an explosive offense that LSU is going to be facing here on Saturday, but it is an offense that, given what we just discussed with the LSU defense, is something that they're going to really have to bear down and defend honestly. What are you expecting from Florida? What do you suspect that they'll try to do, Rab, on Saturday?
What immediately came to mind, what you're saying there, staying on schedule, moving the chains. Doesn't have to be, the 40-yard game. Like, remember last week we talked about Alabama, LSU being worried about them hitting, the huge bombs because they were good at that, and LSU was susceptible to that. And even more so, LSU is susceptible to allowing teams to move the chains on third downs. And so it's, if I'm Florida, I'm very happy to have a 11-play, 75-yard drive that takes 7 minutes off the clock. The 7 minutes that Jayden Daniels, we assume, the LSU offense doesn't have the ball. So I think that's going to be very, very big for them. Running the ball consistently, some play action passes, or other, controlled passing game. They don't have to overwhelm LSU. They can. LSU doesn't have to get beat that way on defense. They've shown that they have a defense that is, can be paper cut to death, and that could be very effective for Florida Saturday.
The Florida, it's interesting because, like you said, there's some pieces there that make you think like, okay, LSU is really going to have to account for and be kind of worried about. Like Pearsall has been really good this year. Mertz, like you said, over 2,400 yards passing. In that game against Tennessee, they ran the ball incredibly well in particular, but it's kind of funky that now over the course of the season, they have not been like a super great rushing offense. So that's, they're probably going to try to have offensive balance. In LSU, maybe the best path is to, in some way, make them one-dimensional. But it's interesting also, like the Pearsall thing makes me think back to the Missouri game with Luther Burden. And Luther Burden is a level above Pearsall. But LSU's going to have to account for, and that Missouri offense is, the further they go down the season, DOE shows up and like they've got more weapons than probably Florida does. But LSU ended up doing a good job for a large swath of that game, neutralizing Luther Burden.
Yeah.
And that was, I mentioned earlier, like making an adjustment. LSU came out I'm trying to remember exactly what it did. I think it came out in man coverage in that game and then switched to zone when it wasn't working at all. And so, they were able to do that in that game, and by doing so, kind of neutralize Missouri in a lot of ways. And might have to do something similar here in terms of what you're doing coverage-wise in order to neutralize Pearsall. Because if they can turn Florida, if they can just take away Florida's passing game or something like that, then and put it all on this rushing offense that hasn't been all that great, then that's the path. Or vice versa, if you're putting it all on Graham Mertz and Pearsall to make plays. That's worrisome because we know what LSU secondary is like. But again, anything that you can do to kind of make Florida one-dimensional is a good way forward.
Billy Napier, if you followed Billy Napier while he was at UL, they very much were a run-first offense. And they were, believe me, from having watched for 5 years, when he was at UL, there were not a lot of 53-7 wins. There were a lot of, and I mean this as it's a credit to him and to the quarterback they had from Scotlandville at the time, Levi Lewis, who was a great leader and a great sort of manager of that offense. He wasn't a quote unquote game manager, but he knew how to run that offense, and they got the most out of what they had, and it was primarily on the ground, and they won a lot of games 27-20 or something to that effect. I do think they want to run the ball first, and to that end, I would say that if I were an LSU football fan, I would be tremendously worried about LSU, the run fits, the assignments, filling gaps, making sound tackles, all those things that you thought maybe they were starting to get better at against, albeit, some suspect offenses in Army and Auburn, but they came right back and reared their ugly head against Alabama. I would be frankly worried more so about the ground first, because if they establish the run and they start, I mean, my goodness, didn't Grambling average something like 9 yards per carry in the first half in that game all those months ago?
Yeah, I can't remember now.
It was a lot, but I mean, certainly their run fits were not good in that game, and we thought they got that cleaned up, and well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. So anyway, we discussed earlier in this podcast about, hey, what would you like to see about the LSU defense, over the last these final 3 games? I would say tackle.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. That's such a good point, because it's like one of the most fundamental things about the game, blocking and tackling, and we've had to talk about it all year. The tackling. I mean, LSU, according to PFF, missed 12 tackles against Alabama. That was the most that it had missed since the Ole Miss game. It, like you said, reared its head again, and yeah, that would be. I think that I might have to change my pick about making adjustments, because that would be like the most basic thing, is just do the fundamentals well. Brian Kelly talks about this all the time with this defense in particular, because it's not loaded with stars and you probably don't have the ability to do lots of different exotic, interesting defensive things. Like, just do the fundamentals correctly and you might be in a better position. They talk all the time. Greg Penn brings this up because we end up talking to Greg Penn quite a bit. LSU just kind of decides who's available post game and who comes during the week. And
Latter-day Liam Shanahan.
Yeah. But Penn talks about that often. It's like, just do your job. Like, everybody just needs to do their job. Sometimes they get in this mode where they try to do too much or do someone else's, and all that does is expose a hole where you were supposed to be. And so, yeah, just doing those fundamentals, like leveraging and tackling and eye discipline, should put you in a decent position to win these next 3 games.
It's interesting. You brought up the adjustments that LSU made against Missouri, which to me, Rab, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot here, but it, to me, makes it that much more perplexing and sort of flummoxing that LSU didn't appear to make many adjustments against Alabama. What do you make of that?
I don't know. There's been a lot of head-scratching things that are going on defense this year, starting, of course, with the Harold Perkins decision to play inside linebacker. I don't know. I mean, it seemed like you learn your personnel over the course of the season, and you start to make adjustments, figure out what they can handle and what they can't, and then to hear Brian Kelly on Monday say, "Yeah, we probably should have spied more on Jalen Milroe." It's like I don't get it. They seem kind of. I'm only making an assumption. They don't trust these players to handle big changes, in-game changes, to go away from the game plan. That's what we decided to do going into the game.
But they did that against Missouri, though. And that's they did. It just.
Well, what's interesting about that one adjustment, just a note about it, not to like let anyone off the hook. They've been a zone team almost all year.
No, that's true.
They went to man. They went back to what they knew.
Right. That's fair. Yeah.
But, I don't know. I mean, it's one of the questions you have about this staff and Brian Kelly. He doesn't look like he's going to make any in-season changes like we just saw at USC. Again, a team we've compared a lot to LSU the course of the season, with a great offense and a very porous defense. Lincoln Riley just fired Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator he brought with him from Oklahoma after they lost. He gave up 52 to Washington. I don't think he's going to do that, but he's got some big things to think about over the course of the year. But in the meantime, that's the end of the season, and he doesn't want to talk about that at all. And you're not going to force it out of him under hot lights or anything, to talk about it. But in the meantime, what do you do? And you have to be a little more, as Wilson said. If that's not working, let's try that. You might as well. You're giving up big yards and big plays anyway, and superlatives that have never existed before. Jalen Milroe was the first quarterback in Alabama history to rush for 4 touchdowns in a game.
Right.
You think in the wishbone days somebody would have done that. So be willing to try something. If it doesn't work, try something else. And I don't claim to be an X's and O's person per se, but I do think they seem kind of unwilling to bend away from the game plan, because I have to assume because they don't think the players can handle it very well.
I will say this, and you guys can tell me. I'm going to throw something out there. You guys tell me if I'm full of malarkey or not. You mentioned that Brian Kelly, hey, you're not going to get him to the bright lights and sweat it out of him as to whether he's going to make a decision or not on coaching, and that, hey, I'm focused on Florida and all that kind of stuff. Which, I mean, that's the right answer to give. But by the same token, I did note that on Monday during his press conference, he did not stand up and say, "Look, hey, we've had a rough year. We've had a rough couple of years here. These are growing pains, so on and so on and so forth. But you know what? Matt House is my guy. I'm standing behind him. I'm not worried about him. He's going to get this thing straight. We're going to get this thing straight. All is well, and we'll see you down the road with him and all that." didn't say that. Am I making too much out of that? Am I being a little too early and a little too presumptuous that is a sign that maybe the two of them are not all the way on board together and in lockstep, and changes could potentially be afoot? Or are we just? Is it just too early to start trying to figure out what's going to happen there?
No, so I don't think you're. I think you're maybe drawing something out of the press conference, drawing too much out of the press conference comments, in that, like, the last time that Brian Kelly full-throatedly defended Matt House was right after the Ole Miss game, and he was asked directly about Matt House. The only question that was asked of Brian Kelly in his press conference on Monday specifically is related to, like, the defensive staff. I asked, it was, how would you evaluate your defensive coaching staff at this point in the season? And he took that very broadly, ended up sort of evaluating the defense, not really the coaching very much at all. And so he was never really directly asked about Matt House. At the same time, there's I don't think that you would be wrong to think that there are staff changes coming. I mean, you can't. Performance speaks for itself, and it would be a surprise if something did not get shaken up. Whether that includes Matt House, who that includes, all that is probably where we're getting a little bit too far ahead of ourselves.
Right.
But you can't go through a season like this and not make some kind of change in the offseason. We saw it last year with special teams.
Sure.
I mean,
That's
your
true.
special teams are bad. They've made a change in order to improve.
And Brian Polian was one of his guys.
Yeah, one of his guys. He wasn't throwing him under the bus or anything like that during the course of the season. But when the season came over, it was like, this has to improve. I can imagine when that conversation was like, Brian, you're one of my guys, but I got to make a move, and I got to think there will be. But that's not one of the tells Brian Kelly has. He talked a lot about the players and all this. And again, it's a collective problem on defense. It's not Matt House. There's
plenty of blame to go around. Sure,
plenty of blame to go around, and tackling and being being fundamentally sound and not trying to over pursue or do things that aren't your assignment. Those can be things that are attributed to the players, but it's going to be something that has to change. Like, he knows, and he's been a head coach for over 30 years. He talks about being elite and getting to that level and being that level that this is why I came to LSU. Wasn't to play defense like this. And so I'm sure there's some kind of changes coming in the offseason, but that includes recruiting better on defense, and that is something that has been lacking compared to what they've done on offense. Maybe it's good fortune. The transfers like Jayden and like Logan Diggs have really panned out in a tremendously good way, a positive way for you. And on defense, they haven't. It's been much more hit and miss. Maybe that's just the breaks of the game. But I got to think some of those things have to change, because they're never going to get there at this rate. You're not going to be that championship program that you want to be playing defense like this.
Well, also, it's interesting that you mentioned the recruiting piece of it, because that is so important for this program long term. On offense, over the last 2 years, you didn't have to bring in the same number of guys, because you had recruited, like, guys like my league neighbors who were already on this team. Will Campbell, Emory Jones. You signed them out of high school and were able to develop them and bring, and a lot of those guys who are on the offense, when you look at it, were just signed. I mean, there's some caveats to that. Miles Frazier was a transfer. Logan Diggs, Jayden, Kyron Lacey, transfers, but it's been much more overwhelming, especially this season, on the defensive side. And it speaks to a lot of what Brian Kelly's talked about before, which is that he doesn't want to be a program that is constantly going through the portal like it has to over the last 2 years. They're going to have to continue to recruit at a high level, which they've done a decent job of. I don't get too wrapped up in, sometimes you don't really know about a recruiting class until 2 to 3 years after you signed it, kind of thing. And they're only in their now second full class, really, will be signed this year. They need to continue to recruit so that they can get themselves out of what they've had to do, like at cornerback, going constantly through it, and then you end up with like 4 transfers who aren't even available against Alabama. So then that's going to take time and some patience. And in the meantime, though, you got to try to keep developing who you have on your team.
We know that there will be changes afoot. We also know that there will be changes afoot to the LSU football schedule. Rab, I wanted to bring this up just maybe a minute or two on the LSU-Florida series. They're scheduled to play next year, are they not?
Yes, LSU goes to games,
obviously we don't know what the dates are for any of these opponents, but we know that LSU and
It's
Florida
coming in
will play.
December. Greg Sankey said at halftime of the game Saturday. That's
Which is
coming in
important because, hey, clock's ticking now. You've had plenty of time to try to figure this out.
Seems like something right around the SEC championship game would be a logical announcement date.
Yeah.
I just really speculate, but it feels like, everything nice wrapped, paired together.
I think right after the championship game, we're
Okay.
going to see something the next week, if I had to guess. Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't know. We know that they'll play next year. We don't know beyond that. It's the same as all the other opponents. We
But
don't
it
know
seems likely that they will not be permanent opponents, that they will not play on an annual basis, which they've done since 1971.
Which I find
long time.
I was just gonna, if you first of all, doesn't it say everything that this game, which used to be the primetime game on CBS, is now primetime on the SEC network? It speaks to where these two programs are, I think. But also just sort of, I don't know if you just want to sort of, this was a series that ran hot for quite a while, and there were certainly factions of the LSU fan base that weren't fired up about having to face Florida for years after year. Are we going to lose something? And if so, how significant is it out of this series?
Yeah, I think so. But I think it's just part of the cost of doing business. If you're expanding the conference and you have to make a big change to your schedule, there's just no way to make these two schools that are so far apart that and divisions are going away too next year. So I don't want to even make it about East versus West, but that you can justify them playing every year. If you have one permanent opponent for Florida, it's almost certain to be Georgia. And if you have one permanent opponent for LSU, it looks like it's going to be Texas A&M. If it's three, you still don't see it being Florida, though you could. But I would imagine Florida is going to be Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, somebody like that.
Right.
Some kind of combination. So it's unfortunate. It's one of the several unfortunate things. This is a series like the Auburn series. It's been very entertaining. A lot of close games, a lot of very memorable games, a lot of great players on both sides. Maybe even a little more so than Auburn. And like I said, there have been a lot of complaints over the years because it's like LSU's having to play Florida, who's one of the best programs in the country, and Alabama's playing some high school from Dothan. I mean, what's going on? And that wasn't the case, but it is kind of felt that way for LSU fans. They play Vandy again. Wow, how did that happen? But it's a shame that it's going to go away, but it has been an established series for a very long time, more than 50 years. And going to this one, what the record is? 33, 33, and 3.
Wow.
Florida had a big lead from the Spurrier years.
Well,
LSU has whittled into that over the years.
I'll put a little asterisk on
Very
there. Three of those wins three of those LSU wins got vacated. So
okay, well on the field it's 33, 33, and 3. But people are like, what's the 3? Yeah, they used to have ties in college football. But yeah, it's a shame. On balance, it's kind of a shame that because this has been a very entertaining, compelling series over the years.
It's also the cost of doing business.
It is.
There's lots of series that have gone by the wayside, and that's just sort of the way things are going to be. But before we get out of here, we'll bring up one more topic, and that of course is a prediction. I won't ask you guys for one prediction. Actually, I'll ask for two. LSU is a 14-point favorite. Over under is 63.5, depending on where you shop. But I'll ask you guys for two predictions instead of trying to sort of pin you down when we don't really know yet at this point whether Jayden Daniels is going to play. So if Jayden Daniels plays, what happens in this game, Rab? And if he doesn't play, what happens?
I think if Jayden plays, he's not quite hitting on all cylinders, but they're still being pretty effective offensively. And I think Florida gets their points too. I think it's a pretty high-scoring game, somewhat reminiscent of the Arkansas game, and LSU wins like 38-30. If he doesn't play, I want to say Florida's going to win, but I don't think they're going to quite pull it off. I think they haven't played well on balance since they beat Tennessee. When you thought, they turned a corner, and they kind of turned a corner into a kind of a brick wall, really. So I think LSU still pulls out a game, but it's like 31-29. It's really 31-28, something like that. It's really close if Jayden doesn't play.
I have more faith in Garrett Nussmeier than Grab does. I think LSU wins either way. It's probably, like you said, maybe you're not like as sleek offensively as you have been this year.
Good work.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sometimes I write.
We don't just talk.
I think LSU wins either way, though, and with Garrett, being able to still have an explosive passing game, there's so many pieces around him that he can be successful. We saw him in the Georgia game last year and in the Citrus Bowl against Purdue have success. And, we were walking into the facility yesterday on Tuesday for interviews, and you could hear Garrett's voice from the practice facility. Like, it would be a difference throwing him in the fourth quarter of an Alabama game when he gets like barely any time versus going in through this whole week, having quite a few reps, and knowing that, even though it's going to be kind of up in the air over late in the week to a degree, like I feel like Jayden is currently on track to, as we record, like on track to play. And so, but it's still like Garrett would be getting prepared in just a little bit of a different way, probably. And I think that he'd be successful, and I think that LSU wins either way. Don't ask me for my score specifically, because I don't know just yet, but I feel like regardless of who the quarterback is, that LSU just has just a much better offense and a strength that Florida can't quite claim on either side of the ball.
We will predictions, yes or no? Will it rain? Rab?
Yeah, we need, and I can't say we don't need rain. I look at my yard and we need rain. So yes, hopefully so.
Wilson's going to rain.
No, it never rains at Tiger Stadium.
Okay,
chance of rain is never.
No,
so
that's the right
it's
answer.
not going to rain.
You got to learn. You got to learn from this young buck. See, he knows what he's doing.
I've even had to move to the second row of the press box because it was raining in Tiger Stadium. The wind's blowing it in. We're like, oh, look, those guys in the press box, they're all dry. Not necessarily.
Oh, well, that's fair. Meanwhile, I don't think any of the fans are going to have any sympathy for us.
No, I'm not asking.
Out there in their ponchos with their hidden flasks or whatever. We'll wrap it up there. As we say, we are here every Monday and Thursday on all our social channels and our YouTube channels, specifically LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. Please subscribe to that channel. Even if you don't catch us live, you can catch us later on that same YouTube channel at any point. As I say, we are also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, wherever the finer podcasts are found. We are brought to you by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL, financial member FINRA, SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. But to learn more, please go to championwealthstrategies.com. I almost made it through, and I didn't. I apologize. I apologize to all you guys, but I promise we are happy to have you aboard. We will wrap it up there. We will come back on Monday, obviously, to wrap up whatever may or may not have happened, rain or not, rain or shine in Tiger Stadium, and to take a look at LSU women's basketball and men's basketball as well, and preview the final 2 weeks of the regular season in football. So for Wilson Alexander, for Scott Rabalais, I am Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.